she was worth $1.2 billion. She was also bleeding through her surgical gauze, trembling from residual anesthesia, and holding two newborn infants who had almost died inside her body 3 hours earlier. The man walking through the door did not know about the money. He had come to tell her she was nothing. Vivian Ashford lay in the recovery room of Chicago Lakeside Medical Center with 17 metal staples holding her abdomen together beneath a dressing that was slowly turning red. The emergency cesarean had lasted 38 minutes. Both fetal heart rates had dropped simultaneously on the monitors around noon, the jagged lines plunging into patterns that made the senior attending grab a surgical cap and start running without finishing his sentence. Vivian remembered the fluorescent lights streaking overhead as they wheeled her down the corridor, the cold paralysis of the spinal block climbing her spine, the pressure that was not quite pain, but something worse, the sensation of being opened while fully conscious, of feeling her children pulled from her body by gloved hands she could not see. Now, 3 hours later, she held them. A boy in her left arm. He had come first, screaming so hard his entire body shook, announcing his arrival with a fury that made 2 delivery nurses laugh out loud. She had already chosen his name months ago. Caleb. It meant wholehearted. A girl in her right arm. She had come second, quieter, one tiny fist already gripping the fabric of her mother's hospital gown as though she understood, at the level of cellular instinct, that holding on was the only strategy that mattered. Lily, named after a flower her grandmother once told her was stubborn enough to bloom twice. Vivian held them against her chest and felt the flutter of 2 new heartbeats pressed against her own, and for a span of time she would later measure in minutes, but that felt, while it lasted, like something outside of time altogether. Nothing else existed. Not the pain, not the blood, not the catheter or the 4-line, or the monitors beeping their indifferent rhythm beside her bed. Just warmth and weight, and the impossible smallness of 2 people who had not existed that morning and who now contained, between them, everything in the world she was willing to die for. Then the door opened. Harrison Ashford did not knock. He had never knocked on a door in his life. Knocking implied that access could be denied, and Harrison had spent 42 years in a world where no door was ever closed to him. He entered the recovery room the way he entered every room, chin forward, shoulders square, as though the space itself existed at his discretion. He was tall, 6'1", with the rigid posture of a man who had been groomed from birth to occupy more space than he required. Charcoal suit, tailored to whisper money rather than shout it. Platinum cufflinks. Italian shoes that struck the hospital floor with a steady, mechanical rhythm that sounded less like footsteps and more like a verdict being delivered one stride at a time. He did not look at the babies. Half a step behind him, positioned with the deliberate precision of someone who had rehearsed the choreography, stood Naomi Blackwell. Vivian saw her and understood. Not everything. Not yet. But enough. Naomi was 29, ash blonde, her hair pulled into a low chignon that exposed a jawline sharp enough to cut glass. Slate gray suit, pearl studs, an expression carefully arranged to project sympathy, with just enough softness at the edges to suggest she took no pleasure in being here. She did. Vivian could tell. It was in the way her eyes swept the room, the monitors, the blood-spotted gauze, the newborn infants, and dismissed all of it as scenery behind the main event. 7 months ago, Harrison had introduced Naomi at an investor dinner at their home as his new director of strategic development. His palm had rested on the small of her back 2 seconds longer than professional courtesy allowed. Vivian had noticed. That night, lying beside a husband who was either asleep or pretending to be, she had asked about it, keeping her voice light, measured, the way women learn to frame questions when they already suspect the answer but fear the confirmation more than the uncertainty. Harrison had not even opened his eyes. "You are being paranoid again, Vivian. It is exhausting." She had apologized. That was the last apology she would ever make. Harrison pulled a manila envelope from inside his jacket and dropped it onto the rolling tray beside the bed. It landed with a flat, papery slap directly on top of the surgical consent form she had signed 4 hours earlier. the form authorizing the emergency procedure that had saved all three of their lives. The envelope covered it completely. "I've had my attorney file for divorce," Harrison said. His tone was level, rehearsed, surgically stripped of anything that might be mistaken for emotion. "The paperwork was stamped at the courthouse this afternoon. This is your copy." Ruth, the recovery nurse, stopped writing. Her pen hovered over the clipboard. 26 years in labor and delivery, and she had never witnessed anything like the scene forming in front of her. Vivian blinked. The morphine made everything feel slightly displaced, signals arriving through deep water. She heard the words. She understood each one individually. But assembled in this room, at this moment, with her body torn open and stapled shut, and her children still warm from the passage that had nearly killed all three of them, the sentence refused to form a shape she could hold. "Harrison." Her voice came out scraped raw, barely more than a whisper. "I just had our babies." "I know," he said. He still did not look at them. "That is why we are handling this now. Clean. No reason to let it drag." He said it the way he closed real estate deals. Same cadence. Same boardroom finality. As though ending an 8-year marriage was simply an agenda item that had overstayed its slot. Naomi spoke from the doorway. "This affects everyone, Vivian." Her voice was smooth, calibrated, the voice of a woman who had rehearsed kindness until it almost sounded real. "Harrison and I are building something meaningful together. We need to move forward without complications." Complications. Vivian looked down at the twins. The boy had Harrison's angular jaw. The girl had Vivian's wide-set eyes. They were 3 hours old, and a woman in pearl earrings had just called them complications. Harrison took a step closer to the bed. Both infants began to fuss at the same time, tiny bodies tensing, faces scrunching, reacting to something in the air that 3 hours of life had not yet taught them to name, but that their nervous systems already recognized as danger. Vivian tightened her arms around them. "Let me be honest with you," Harrison said, "since apparently no one else has been. You stopped being a partner years ago. You gave up your fellowship, the genomics position at Northwestern, the one your professors called once in a generation." He gestured vaguely downward. "And for what? To sit in my basement playing with petri dishes like a graduate student running a science fair project while I built everything that keeps your life running." He paused. Then, with the casual cruelty of a man referencing a forecast he found mildly inconvenient, he added, "You came from nothing, Vivian. A rented duplex in Youngstown, a mother pulling double hospital shifts, a brother who—" He let the sentence hang. Vivian's entire body locked. Every muscle, every nerve that was not already screaming from the surgery went rigid with a stillness so complete that even the twins fell silent, as though some primal signal had told them not to move. Elijah, her baby brother, born with sickle cell disease, diagnosed at 7, dead at 19 in a hospital bed in Youngstown, while Vivian held his hand and felt the exact moment it went slack. He had looked at her with eyes decades older than his face and whispered, "Viv, you're going to fix this." For someone. Harrison did not know this. Harrison had never asked. In 8 years of marriage, he had never once walked down the basement stairs and asked his wife what she was working on. He checked his watch. A new one, heavier and more expensive than the one she had given him for their 5th anniversary. "You have 48 hours. After that, my attorney files a motion and I stop being generous." He turned and left. Naomi paused in the doorway to deliver one final line. "Take care of yourself, Vivian. Those babies are going to need a strong mother." She smiled, small and precise and victorious, then turned on her heel and was gone. The door closed with a soft pneumatic hiss. Ruth crossed the room in 4 steps, her face a mask of barely contained fury. "I am filing an incident report, serving legal documents to a post-surgical patient under narcotic medication with an unauthorized visitor present and newborn infants in distress. Do you want me to call security? Do you want me to contact someone?" Vivian did not answer immediately. She was looking at the envelope, not at her name, not at the word divorce, but at the filing stamp visible along the top edge. November 18th. Afternoon. She held that number against another number she had memorized that morning, a number embedded in an email she had read at 6:03 a.m. between contractions while the fetal monitors beeped steadily beside her and the world was still intact. Then, slowly, she reached past the envelope and picked up her phone. One email notification from an address she knew by heart. Subject line, licensing agreement executed. Initial payment confirmed. Vivian read it once. Read it again. Then she placed the phone face down on the bed and looked up at Ruth with eyes that had changed. Not louder, not harder, fundamentally different. As though somewhere between Harrison walking out and this moment, the woman in this bed had been quietly replaced by someone who had been waiting a very long time to arrive. I need you to do something for me, Vivian said. Call this number. She recited 10 digits from memory, no hesitation. Tell the woman who answers that Vivian Carter called, and that the clock just started. Ruth stared, trying to reconcile the trembling woman of 5 minutes ago with the one looking back at her now, with dry, steady, absolutely focused eyes. Who is she? Ruth asked. Vivian looked down at her children. My attorney, she said quietly, and she has been expecting this call since the day I signed my prenup. Chapter 2. The phone call lasted 90 seconds. Beatrice Aldridge, 53, senior partner at a London firm specializing in intellectual property and high-stakes marital litigation, was at her desk at 11:47 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time when her personal mobile vibrated against the mahogany. Only 5 people in the world had this number. She answered on the second ring. Mrs. Aldridge, said a voice she did not recognize, tight with controlled emotion. My name is Ruth. I am a nurse at Chicago Lakeside Medical Center. I am calling on behalf of Vivian Carter. She asked me to tell you that the clock has started. For seconds of silence. Then Beatrice said, in a voice that carried the precision of a woman who had spent 3 decades waiting for exactly this kind of phone call. Tell her I will be on the next flight. She was at Heathrow by 1 in the morning. She landed at O'Hare at 6:15 a.m., carrying a single leather briefcase that contained documents she had first assembled the week Vivian got married and had updated every 6 months since. Beatrice had been introduced to Vivian 9 years earlier by Dr. Eleanor Graves, her Cambridge roommate from 3 decades before and her closest friend until Eleanor's death from pancreatic cancer 2 years ago. That introduction had been deliberate. Eleanor had phoned Beatrice the spring before Vivian's wedding, her voice carrying the particular sharp edge it always took on when she was worried about someone she could not protect alone. There is a prenuptial agreement, Eleanor had said. His family's lawyers drafted it. It is one-sided, aggressive, and designed to ensure that if the marriage ends, the woman leaves with nothing. I need you to look at it, Beatrice. I need you to fix it. Beatrice had looked at it. She had spent 3 days disassembling the prenup clause by clause. Then she and Eleanor had spent 2 more days together in Beatrice's London office, the molecular biologist and the attorney side by side at the conference table, constructing something that was not a legal document so much as a strategic weapon hidden inside one. The prenuptial agreement had a main body and 6 appendices, labeled F through F. The main body covered the expected provisions, asset division, alimony caps, confidentiality. Appendices A through C addressed bank accounts, retirement funds, and personal property. Appendix E covered insurance. Appendix F covered dispute resolution. Appendix D was titled Provisions for the Protection of Leveraged Real Estate Holdings and Associated Contractual Obligations. It was 14 pages of dense, technical real estate law. Anyone reading it would have seen exactly what they expected to see. A fortress of protection for the Ashford family's property empire. Section D. 1. Address property tax exemptions for commercial holdings held in trust. D. 2. Covered 1031 exchange protections during marital dissolution. D. 3. Outlined REIT distribution allocations. D. 5. Dealt with subordination of spousal claims to existing lender liens. And nestled between them, surrounded on all sides by language that spoke exclusively in the vocabulary of real estate, sat Section D4. Its heading read, Timing Provisions for Dissolution in Relation to Major Financial Transactions. The section ran 2.5 pages. The first page and a half established a rationale in purely real estate terms. It discussed the risk of opportunistic divorce filings timed to coincide with major property closings, a scenario in which one spouse might initiate dissolution proceedings immediately after the other closed a high-value acquisition, thereby claiming a share of the newly acquired asset before it could be properly categorized and protected. This was a real concern, a recognized issue in high-net-worth divorce law, and one that Gerald Price, the Ashford family's attorney, would have flagged immediately if the section had not already addressed it in precisely the language he would have used himself. That was Eleanor's contribution. She had spent 2 evenings reading Gerald Price's published articles on real estate asset protection, studying his syntax, his preferred terminology, his habit of nesting critical provisions inside layers of qualifying subclauses. When she and Beatrice drafted Section D4, they wrote it in his voice. Every sentence read like something Price himself might have authored on a Tuesday afternoon between client meetings. The critical provision appeared on page 9 of the appendix, formatted identically to the real estate clauses surrounding it. It read, asterisk in the event that either party executes a financial contract, licensing agreement, or commercial transaction with a total value exceeding $100 million, and the other party initiates formal dissolution proceedings within 60 calendar days of such execution, the initiating party shall forfeit 40% of their independently verified personal net worth as liquidated damages, payable within 90 days of the final dissolution decree. This provision applies symmetrically to both parties and shall be enforceable regardless of whether the initiating party had knowledge of the executed transaction at the time of filing. Asterisk read in isolation. The clause was extraordinary, but it was not meant to be read in isolation. It was meant to be read at 11:30 at night by a 60-year-old real estate attorney who had already spent 4 hours reviewing a 41-page prenuptial agreement, whose eyes were trained to scan for threats to his client's property holdings, and who, upon encountering a section titled Provisions for the Protection of Leveraged Real Estate Holdings, would read it with the comfortable, slightly diminished attention that experts give to material they believe they already understand. Gerald Price reviewed the prenup over 3 days. He flagged 11 provisions in the main body for revision. He strengthened the alimony cap. He added a sunset clause to the spousal support schedule. He tightened the language around the Ashford family trust. He did not flag Appendix D. His notes, which Beatrice had obtained through discovery preparation, contained a single annotation beside the appendix. Asterisk standard RE protections. Comprehensive. No issues. Asterisk he had initialed it and moved on. Beatrice had kept that annotation in her files for 8 years. She had looked at it every 6 months when she updated Vivian's dossier. And every time she looked at it, she felt the same quiet, professional satisfaction of an architect reviewing a load-bearing wall that had been built exactly to specification. The agreement was signed on August 14th, 8 years ago. Both parties present. Both parties represented by independent counsel. Witnessed by 2 signatories. Notarized. Filed with the Cook County Clerk's Office. Independently archived with Beatrice's firm in London. At the rehearsal dinner the following evening, Harrison had stood with a champagne flute in one hand and the other resting on his father's shoulder and told a room full of guests that the prenup was, quote, the smartest contract I have ever signed. Airtight. My team made sure of it. 47 people heard him say this. Beatrice had obtained signed declarations from 6 of them. Now, 8 years and 1 emergency cesarean later, Beatrice sat in the passenger seat of a hired car on the Kennedy Expressway, heading toward Chicago Lakeside Medical Center with the briefcase on her lap. Inside it, arranged in the sequence she had planned years ago, were the documents that would dismantle Harrison Ashford's life in the same methodical, unhurried manner in which he had attempted to dismantle his wife's. She arrived at the hospital at 7:45 a.m. The morning light was thin and gray, filtering through the windows of the recovery ward with the pallid quality of a Chicago November that could not decide whether to rain or simply remain overcast indefinitely. Vivian was awake, propped against pillows, the twins asleep in the bassinet beside her. The morphine drip had been reduced. Her eyes were clear. Beatrice closed the door, pulled a chair to the bedside, and sat down. For a moment, neither woman spoke. They had met in person only 4 times over the course of 8 years. Twice in London, once in a hotel conference room in Toronto, once in a rented office in Delaware. The rest of their communication had been conducted through encrypted emails and quarterly phone calls lasting no more than 15 minutes. Always placed from the prepaid phone Vivian kept locked in a fireproof case in the basement laboratory. Always at hours when Harrison was traveling or asleep. "Tell me everything," Beatrice said. Vivian told her. The recovery room. The envelope. Naomi in the doorway. The word complications. Harrison's voice, flat and transactional, announcing the end of their marriage over the heads of children he had not looked at. The filing stamp. November 18th afternoon. Beatrice listened without interruption. When Vivian finished, Beatrice opened her briefcase and removed a single sheet of paper. She placed it on the bed where Vivian could see it. It was a printout of the wire transfer confirmation from Meridian Pharmaceuticals for $100 million, deposited into the account of Carter Biosciences LLC at 9:41 a.m. on November 18th. The licensing agreement was executed at 6:03 a.m., Beatrice said. His divorce filing was stamped at 3:47 p.m., 9 hours and 44 minutes apart. The 60-day window is active. Vivian looked at the number. For $100 million. The first tranche of a $1.2 billion deal, negotiated over 14 months between Beatrice's IP team and Meridian's legal department, for the exclusive commercial development of the CRISPR-based gene editing protocol that Vivian had built, one failed experiment at a time, in a basement her husband called a waste of square footage. He never came downstairs, Vivian said. It was not a complaint. It was a data point. The foundation of everything that was about to happen rested on a single, verifiable fact. In 8 years of marriage, Harrison Ashford had never once descended the basement stairs to observe what his wife was doing. He had never asked about the equipment she ordered, never questioned the late nights, the early mornings, the quiet, relentless rhythm of a woman conducting research that would alter the course of human medicine. He had dismissed it so completely that he had failed to notice when it succeeded. He found the LLC, Vivian added. Or rather, Naomi found it. 4 months ago, a database search turned up Carter Biosciences. Naomi flagged it and brought it to Harrison. Beatrice's eyebrow rose by a fraction. And he laughed, said it was probably some vanity registration I set up to feel important. Vivian paused. He did not run an asset search. He did not request financials. He dismissed it in front of Naomi over a glass of Barolo and never thought about it again. Beatrice was quiet for a moment. Then she said, with the measured precision of a woman selecting her next words from a much larger arsenal, his attorney will have reviewed the prenup before filing. I am certain Philip Crane reviewed it. Then Philip Crane read Appendix D and saw exactly what Gerald Price saw 8 years ago. Real estate protections. Standard language. No threat. Yes. Good. Beatrice placed the sheet back in the briefcase. Then we proceed as planned. She outlined the timeline. 3 days for Vivian to recover sufficiently to attend an in-person meeting. During those 3 days, Beatrice's team would finalize the forensic financial assessment of Harrison's personal assets, compile the prenuptial enforcement package, and prepare the disclosure documents for the Meridian agreement. There is one additional matter, Beatrice said. She removed a second document from the briefcase. Corporate filing records from the Illinois Secretary of State's office, accompanied by a printout of 3 consulting contracts executed between Ashford Capital Partners and Blackwell Strategic Advisory LLC over the past 7 months. Total value, $640,000. These were awarded by Harrison directly, Beatrice said. No competitive bidding. No independent board review. No disclosure of the personal relationship between the CEO and the principal of the contracting firm. Vivian looked at the contracts. $640,000. The amount was not large by the standards of Ashford Capital's operations, but the structure was damning. Harrison had funneled company money to his mistress's firm through contracts that existed on paper, but whose deliverables were, upon examination, either redundant with work already performed by existing staff or so vaguely defined as to be unverifiable. How did you find these? Vivian asked. Naomi Blackwell is meticulous about many things, Beatrice said. Filing corporate disclosures on time is not one of them. Her quarterly report to the Illinois Secretary of State was submitted 11 days late. Our paralegal monitors those filings. The delay made the contracts visible in a window where they would normally have been buried. Vivian absorbed this. Naomi, the woman who had stood in a doorway and called newborn children complications, had been undone by an 11-day clerical delay. There was no satisfaction in this observation, only the flat recognition that carelessness, like cruelty, eventually produces consequences, and that the universe, indifferent to everything else, is remarkably consistent about delivering them. We will not need the contracts in the primary proceeding, Beatrice said. The prenup is sufficient, but they give us leverage with Miss Blackwell independently, and they give us insurance if Harrison's team attempts to reframe the narrative. She closed the briefcase. Rest, she said. Hold your children. I will handle the construction. You will handle the delivery. After Beatrice left, Vivian lay in a hospital bed with the twins against her chest and stared at the ceiling for a very long time. She was thinking about Elijah. Not the way she usually thought about him, not the memory of the hospital room in Youngstown, not the slack hand, not the last words. She was thinking about a summer afternoon when she was 14 and he was 12, both of them lying on the roof of their mother's rented duplex, staring at a sky so blue it looked artificial. And Elijah had turned to her and said completely unprompted, "Viv, do you think people can tell when someone is going to be important? Like before it happens?" She had laughed. "No, I think people are terrible at knowing who matters." "Yeah," Elijah had said, grinning that lopsided grin that made everyone around him feel like the world was slightly less serious than they had been told. "Yeah, that is what I think too." He had died 5 years later in a hospital bed 60 miles from that rooftop. Sickle cell crisis. Organ failure. 19 years old with a body that had spent every day of those 19 years at war with itself. Red blood cells collapsing in a crescent that blocked his vessels and starved his tissues and turned the simple act of being alive into an endurance test that he passed every single day until the day he did not. Vivian had held his hand. She had felt the exact moment the grip released, and she had heard his last coherent words, spoken with a clarity that should not have been possible from a boy whose organs were shutting down. "You are going to fix this. For someone." She had built the laboratory in the basement of Harrison's Lincoln Park townhouse 11 months after the wedding. Harrison had objected to the cost, relented when she offered to fund it from her own savings, and never mentioned it again. The equipment was second-hand, refurbished, purchased from university, surplus auctions, and decommissioned hospital labs. The overhead fluorescent tube buzzed and flickered. The ventilation was inadequate. The space was cold in winter and stifling in summer. She worked there every day for 8 years. The research was a CRISPR, Cas9 protocol targeting the point mutation in the HBB gene responsible for sickle cell disease. The approach was not novel in concept. Gene editing for sickle cell had been theorized, attempted, and partially demonstrated by multiple research teams worldwide. What Vivian developed was different in execution, a delivery mechanism that achieved editing efficiency rates 3 times higher than the existing standard, with off-target effects so low they approached statistical zero. The protocol could be administered in a single outpatient session. The projected cost per treatment, once scaled, was less than $4,000, a fraction of the chronic management costs that currently consume the lives and savings of millions of families worldwide. She had contacted Meridian Pharmaceuticals 14 months ago through Beatrice's IP team. The negotiations had been conducted entirely through encrypted channels, with all communications routed through Carter Biosciences LLC, the Delaware entity Vivian had established 3 years before meeting Harrison. Harrison had never known, not because Vivian was hiding from him, but because Harrison had never looked. The distinction mattered. Secrecy requires effort. Invisibility, when granted by someone else's contempt, is effortless. Now, lying in a hospital bed with 17 staples in her abdomen and a $1 billion contract confirmed on her phone and a manila envelope full of divorce papers on the tray beside her, Vivian closed her eyes and spoke to her brother in the only way she could. Asterisk, I did it, Eli. For someone. Asterisk, then she opened her eyes, picked up the manila envelope, and read every word of her husband's divorce filing with the focused, unhurried attention of a scientist reviewing data. She found no surprises. The filing was exactly what she expected, an aggressive, one-sided petition designed to strip her of everything and frame the result as generosity. The proposed settlement was $850,000, less than 0.1% of what she was now worth. Harrison's declared income was listed at a figure she recognized immediately as artificially reduced, roughly 60% of what the forensic assessment would show. She set the papers down, picked up her phone, and composed a text to Beatrice. 6 words. Asterisk, 3 days. I will be ready. Asterisk, then she turned off the phone, placed it face down on the bed, and held her children while the morphine receded and the pain returned and the sun moved across the ceiling of a room where everything had ended and everything had begun on the same November afternoon. Chapter 3. 3 days after the twins were born, Vivian Ashford walked into the law offices of Whitmore, Aldridge, and Crane on the 41st floor of a glass tower in downtown Chicago. She wore a navy dress, structured shoulders, neckline at the collarbone. No jewelry except a thin gold chain that had belonged to Eleanor Graves, left to her in Eleanor's will alongside a handwritten note. Wear this when you need to remember that you are not who they think you are. She had not worn it in 2 years. She put on that morning while her mother held the twins in the next room, and when the clasp clicked shut against the back of her neck, something clicked shut inside her too. A door closing. A woman who had spent 8 years apologizing for her own existence, stepping aside to make room for the one who had been waiting underneath. Her mother, Gloria Carter, 61, retired obstetric nurse, had arrived from Youngstown 12 hours after the birth. She had taken one look at the manila envelope on the rolling tray, one look at her daughter's face, and said nothing for a very long time. Gloria did not waste words. She had raised 2 children on a single income, buried a son at 19, watched her daughter marry into a family that looked at her like furniture, and held her silence through all of it because she trusted Vivian's judgment even when Vivian's judgment trusted the wrong man. What do you need me to do? Gloria had asked. Watch the babies. I will handle the rest. Now Gloria sat in the waiting area with Caleb and Lily in a double carrier. Both infants asleep, their faces unbothered by the fact that 30 feet away their mother was about to dismantle their father's entire life. The conference room was designed to communicate power through restraint. Floor-to-ceiling windows over Michigan Avenue. A single slab of dark walnut long enough to seat 12. Leather chairs that made whoever sat in them feel important regardless of whether they deserved to. Harrison was already seated at the far end. Jacket unbuttoned, legs crossed, projecting the specific brand of relaxed authority that men of his background learned before they learned to tie their shoes. Fresh haircut, new cufflinks, platinum. He looked like a man attending a meeting he expected to win before it started. To his left sat Philip Crane, 60, silver-haired, sharp-featured. For decades in family law, his hourly rate was higher than most people's monthly rent. He had never lost a divorce case for a client whose net worth exceeded $10 million. To Harrison's right sat Naomi Blackwell. Vivian paused for exactly 1 second. Not from surprise, from confirmation. Naomi's presence at a legal proceeding to which she had no standing told Vivian everything about the balance of power in that triangle. Naomi was not here because Harrison had invited her. Naomi was here because Naomi had decided she should be, and Harrison had not questioned it. Naomi sat with a leather portfolio open, a pen beside a legal pad on which she had already written several lines. Slate gray suit, hair in its precise chignon. To anyone unfamiliar with the situation, she looked like a consultant or a paralegal. But Vivian knew better. Naomi was here to watch, to calculate, to measure the value of what she was acquiring and the cost of what was being discarded. Vivian sat down, slow, precise, the surgical incision pulled with every shift of weight. She had taken half the recommended pain medication because she needed her mind sharper than the people across the table believed it could be. Beside her sat Beatrice Aldrich. Beatrice had a presence that took people off guard because it did not match expectations. Not tall, not imposing, reading glasses on a thin chain, a leather briefcase that looked like it had survived 3 decades of international litigation, which it had. She looked like someone's favorite professor. This impression had cost opposing counsel in 11 countries a collective amount rumored to exceed $300 million. She sat with a single stack of documents, neatly arranged, edges aligned with a precision that suggested they had been organized not for convenience, but for sequence. Each document would be revealed in a specific order. Each one would build on the last. Philip Crane opened with the confidence of a man who had run this particular script many times. My client wishes to resolve this efficiently and amicably. He is prepared to offer Mrs. Ashford a settlement of $850,000, sole physical custody of the minor children with standard visitation, and structured child support based on current declared income. In exchange, Mrs. Ashford waives all claims to marital property, business assets, intellectual property, and future earnings of any entity in which Mr. Ashford holds interests. He slid a document across the table. 23 pages, bound, tabbed. The product of a legal team billing at $4,000 an hour. Harrison spoke without waiting for Vivian to respond. It is more than fair, Vivian. The particular condescension of a man explaining something obvious to someone he considered slow. $850 is enough to start over somewhere comfortable. Get yourself an apartment. Maybe go back to school. He was looking at his phone as he said this. Vivian did not touch the document. She sat perfectly still, hands folded, waiting. The silence stretched. 5 seconds. 10. At 15, Harrison looked up, frowning slightly, a man whose meeting was not proceeding at the pace he had allocated. Beatrice removed her reading glasses, placed them on the table, and smiled. A small, professional, devastating smile. Mrs. Ashford will not be accepting that offer. In fact, Mrs. Ashford will not be accepting any offer today because your client has already incurred penalties under a prenuptial agreement that makes this proposal legally irrelevant. Philip Crane's expression shifted by 2 degrees. Professional recalibration. There is no prenuptial agreement on file with this divorce. My office conducted a thorough review of all marital documentation. Your office reviewed the documents your client provided. Beatrice corrected gently, which is not the same thing. She slid the first document across the table. The prenuptial agreement. 41 pages. Signed, witnessed, notarized. Filed with Cook County and independently archived in London. Page 1. Signatures of both parties. Mr. Ashford's matches the exemplar on file with his holding company. Mrs. Ashford's matches her medical board certification. Crane pulled the document toward him and began reading rapidly. Harrison watched, and something in his posture shifted. A subtle redistribution of weight. The instinct of a man who had felt the ground move, but had not yet accepted it might give way. I know about the prenup, Harrison said, forcing steadiness into his voice. My father insisted on it. It protects Ashford assets. Her assets. He gestured dismissively toward Vivian. She had nothing to protect. That was the assumption at the time, Beatrice said. And it was an assumption your father's attorney shared when he approved the final language, which is why neither of them noticed that the provisions in Appendix D went somewhat beyond standard real estate protections. She opened the document to a specific page and turned it so both Crane and Harrison could read it. Appendix D, provisions for the protection of leveraged real estate holdings and associated contractual obligations. 14 pages. Mr. Price reviewed this appendix and annotated it as, and I quote, standard RE protections. Comprehensive. No issues. He initialed it and moved on. She paused, allowing Crane's eyes to find the section she was about to name. Section D4. Timing provisions for dissolution in relation to major financial transactions. Nestled between a clause on 1031 exchange protections and a clause on subordination of spousal claims to existing lender liens. Written in real estate terminology. Formatted identically to every other section in the appendix. She read aloud. In the event that either party executes a financial contract, licensing agreement, or commercial transaction with a total value exceeding $100 million, and the other party initiates formal dissolution proceedings within 60 calendar days of such execution. The initiating party shall forfeit 40% of their independently verified personal net worth as liquidated damages, payable within 90 days of the final dissolution decree. She looked up. Mr. Price read this clause 8 years ago and understood it as protection against opportunistic divorce filings timed to coincide with major real estate closings. He was not wrong. That is one of its functions, but it is not the only one. Philip Crane had stopped reading. His pen was motionless. He stared at the page with the expression of a man who has just recognized in a contract he reviewed personally before advising his client's colleague to approve it, a weapon he failed to identify because it was wearing camouflage designed specifically for his eyes. This is, Crane began and stopped. He removed his glasses, pressed them against the bridge of his nose, and started again. This section is embedded in a real estate appendix. It employs real estate terminology. Any reasonable attorney reviewing this document would interpret it as pertaining to real estate transactions. Any reasonable attorney would, Beatrice agreed, and any reasonable attorney did. Including yours. Including Mr. Price. The clause does not disguise itself, Mr. Crane. It simply speaks a language that your colleagues understood so well that they did not notice when it said something unexpected. She let that settle. Then she reached for the next document. But the clause itself is merely architecture. What activates it is this. She placed the second document on the table. Carter Biosciences, LLC. A Delaware limited liability company established 11 years ago, solely owned by Vivian Carter. During the marriage, Mrs. Ashford conducted independent biomedical research through this entity, developing a CRISPR-based gene editing protocol targeting the hereditary mutation responsible for sickle cell disease. Harrison's mouth opened. No sound came out. On the morning of November 18th, at approximately 6:03 a.m., Mrs. Ashford executed an exclusive licensing agreement with Meridian Pharmaceuticals for the commercial development of this protocol. The total value of the agreement is $1.2 billion. The initial payment of $400 million was deposited into Mrs. Ashford's account at 9:41 a.m. that same morning. The room changed. Not the way rooms change in movies. The way rooms change in real life. In silence, in stillness, in the imperceptible recalculation behind the eyes of every person who has just realized that their fundamental assumptions were wrong. Harrison found his voice. Too loud, too fast. That is not possible. You do not have $1 billion. You do not have a company. You sit in my basement and play with test tubes. Beatrice produced a tablet, already open to an email from Meridian's legal department. Transaction reference number. Wire transfer confirmation. Digital signature of Meridian's chief legal officer. She placed it on the table. The wire transfer was confirmed at 9:41 a.m. All records are archived with both parties' legal teams and with the Delaware Secretary of State. Harrison stared at the screen. Vivian watched his face undergo a transformation she had imagined many times. She had expected satisfaction. What she felt instead was quieter. A grief with no anger in it, only exhaustion. The weariness of a woman who had loved someone for 8 years and was now watching the irreversible proof that he had never once looked closely enough to see who she actually was. Now, Beatrice said, the penalty clause. She read directly from the prenup. Section D4. Mrs. Ashford executed the Meridian agreement at 6:03 a.m. on November 18th. Mr. Ashford filed for divorce at 3:47 p.m. on November 18th. 9 hours and 44 minutes apart. The 60-day window has 59 days remaining. Another pause. Shorter. Your client triggered the penalty clause on the same day it became active. Under the terms of a contract he publicly called the smartest he had ever signed, Harrison Ashford now owes Vivian Ashford 40% of his personal net worth. The final document. A forensic financial assessment, 47 pages. Harrison's personal assets, detailed with a thoroughness that made Crane's face go visibly pale. Real estate across 3 states. Investment portfolios. Business interests. Vehicles, including the Mercedes he had driven to this meeting. an art collection acquired over 5 years. Our independent appraisal places Mr. Ashford's current net worth at approximately $48.3 million. 40% is $19.32 million. She folded her hands. That is what your client owes. Not $850,000. $19.32 million, plus full custody, child support against actual income, and all standard protections for the minor children. Philip Crane set down his pen. He removed his glasses and exhaled through his teeth. In 40 years of practice, he had never watched a case detonate. Harrison's hands were gripping the table edge, knuckles white. Color had drained from his face. Real, structural fear. The fear of a man who has understood that the foundation he built his identity on was not solid, and that the person he dismissed as irrelevant held the demolition charge. This is entrapment, Harrison said, his voice raw. You planned this. You got pregnant to keep me in the marriage, and then waited for me to file. Vivian spoke for the first time since entering the room. I did not plan anything, Harrison. Her voice was level, clear, completely devoid of the deference that had characterized every conversation she had had with him for 8 years. The voice of a surgeon explaining a procedure. I worked for 8 years. While you told everyone I was wasting my time, I was solving a problem that kills millions of people, and that killed my brother when he was 19 years old. While you were planning to replace me, I was creating something that will save lives long after both of us are gone. She held his eyes. He could not hold hers. For the first time in their marriage, Harrison looked away first. You never came downstairs, she said. Not once in 8 years. You never asked what I was building, because you did not believe I was capable of building anything worth asking about. You gave me the one thing I needed, Harrison. You gave me time, and I used every hour. Crane attempted recovery. We will challenge the prenup. The clause is hidden in a real estate appendix. It is deceptive. No court will enforce a provision embedded in misleading context. Beatrice tilted her head with the patience of a teacher correcting a confident wrong answer. Mr. Crane, the clause is written in plain English. It is located in a signed, notarized appendix that both parties' attorneys reviewed and approved. Your colleague, Mr. Price, annotated it personally. Your client celebrated the agreement publicly. 47 witnesses heard him call it airtight. She paused. If you argue the clause is deceptive, you will need your client to testify under oath that he signed a 41-page legal document without understanding its contents. Given that Mr. Ashford processes real estate contract valued in the tens of millions annually, I do not believe that argument will survive its first afternoon in court. Crane said nothing. Every exit was sealed. Harrison turned to Naomi. What he saw was something he did not expect. The warmth, the ambition and admiration blend she had projected for 7 months was gone. Her eyes were moving across the financial assessment, and the expression on her face was not that of a partner watching someone she loved suffer. It was the expression of an analyst watching a portfolio collapse in real time. Something in Harrison's eyes broke. Vivian turned to Beatrice and nodded once. Beatrice placed a final sheet on the table. Single page, cleanly typed. Mrs. Ashford offers the following resolution. Mr. Ashford accepts the prenuptial penalties, $19.32 million, payable within 90 days. Full custody to Mrs. Ashford, with supervised visitation on a court-determined schedule. Child support calculated against verified income. She paused. Alternatively, Mr. Ashford may contest the prenup in open court. This triggers full financial disclosure, public proceedings, and supplementary claims including emotional distress and constructive abandonment. We have the incident report from the attending nurse documenting that Mr. Ashford served divorce papers to his wife within 15 minutes of emergency surgery, in the presence of an unauthorized visitor, while the patient was under narcotic medication with newborn infants in distress. She looked at Crane with something approaching sympathy. If this goes to court, it will be public. It will include a full account of how your client treated his wife in her most vulnerable moment. That account will be reported by every media outlet that covers high-profile divorces in Chicago, and it will follow your client for the rest of his professional life. She folded her hands. 48 hours. Vivian stood. Slowly. The pain flared through her abdomen. She absorbed it without changing her expression. She turned to leave, then stopped. "The twins are doing beautifully," she said. Soft, but clear across the room. Caleb smiled yesterday. Lily is already trying to hold her head up. "They are strong, Harrison." She paused. "They get that from me." She walked out. Beatrice followed, closing the door with a soft click that, in the silence, sounded like a lock engaging. Chapter 4. Naomi Blackwell did not leave the conference room with Harrison. For 7 months they had moved in tandem, Naomi half a step behind, positioned to communicate a single message. Asterisk, I belong here. This man is mine. The previous arrangement has been replaced. Asterisk now, as Harrison pushed back from the table with the mechanical movements of a man whose operating system had crashed, Naomi did not stand, did not reach for his arm. She stayed seated. "Naomi." His voice came out thin. The voice of a man calling from a building that was still standing, but no longer structurally sound. "Go ahead," she said. She did not look at him. She was looking at the financial assessment. "I need a minute." Harrison hesitated. Crane was already packing his briefcase with grim efficiency. They exchanged a look that contained no comfort and no plan. Harrison left. The door closed. Naomi sat for 11 seconds. It was a habit from her first year as a junior analyst at a consulting firm where the men outnumbered the women 9-1. 11 seconds to reset, to identify which assumptions were still viable. The answer was none. She had attached herself to Harrison after methodical evaluation. Not as a lover. Not primarily. Harrison was a vehicle. His name opened doors. His company provided infrastructure. His network provided access to a tier of investors she could not have reached on merit alone for another decade. Not because she lacked talent, but because her world rewarded proximity to established men more reliably than it rewarded competence in women without pedigree. The plan had been precise. Separate Harrison from his wife. Position herself as the partner he deserved. Consolidate her role within Ashford Capital, first as director, then co-principal. Marry within 18 months. Launch her own firm within 3, backed by Ashford Capital and credibility. She had made one critical error. She had trusted Harrison's assessment of his own wife. She had accepted his characterization of Vivian as dependent, directionless, incapable, not because evidence supported it, but because the man delivering the assessment spoke with such absolute conviction that questioning him had seemed unnecessary. She had found the Delaware LLC, Carter Biosciences. It had surfaced during her background check 4 months ago. She had flagged it. She had brought it to Harrison. He had dismissed it with a laugh and a wave of his wine glass, and she had let his certainty override her instinct. And that single decision, trusting a man's contempt for his wife over her own professional judgment, had cost her everything. The door opened. Beatrice Aldridge stood in the doorway, holding a single manila folder. "Miss Blackwell, may I have a moment?" Naomi's posture straightened. "Of course." Beatrice sat down across from her and placed the folder on the table without opening it. "You are very good at what you do," Beatrice said. Not a compliment. An assessment. The positioning, the timeline management, the hospital room. Well executed. Naomi said nothing, which is why I wanted to speak with you separately. Because you are intelligent enough to understand what I am about to show you without a lengthy explanation. She opened the folder. 3 pages. Corporate filing records from the Illinois Secretary of State. During our financial investigation, we identified 3 consulting contracts awarded to Blackwell Strategic Advisory, your firm, totaling $640,000. Issued by Mr. Ashford without competitive bidding, without independent board review, and without disclosure of your personal relationship. Naomi's wrist tendons tightened, barely visible. Under Illinois corporate governance law, undisclosed related party contracts constitute a potential breach of fiduciary duty. You may believe these can be resolved through retroactive board approval or compliance correction. Under normal circumstances, you would be right. She turned to the second page. But these are not normal circumstances. Mr. Ashford is about to lose $19.32 million. His institutional investors have already requested emergency meetings. A forensic audit of Ashford Capital's operations is, at this point, not a possibility, but certainty. When that audit begins, every contract your firm executed will be examined under hostile scrutiny by forensic accountants who are not looking for explanations. They are looking for patterns. Beatrice closed the folder. $640,000 in contract awarded to the CEO's undisclosed romantic partner during a period when that CEO was simultaneously concealing assets from his wife and filing for divorce. I do not need to explain to you what that pattern looks like to an auditor, or to a judge, or to every professional contact you have spent the last decade cultivating. Naomi was still. 14 seconds this time, longer than her usual reset, because this was not a standard recalculation. The consulting contracts were not merely a compliance issue. They were a detonator, and the audit was the fuse, and the fuse was already lit. What does Mrs. Ashford want? Naomi asked. Steady. Stripped of polish. Mrs. Ashford wants nothing from you. She does not consider you a party to her marriage. She considers you a variable that Mr. Ashford introduced, and she has accounted for you accordingly. A variable, something calculated around and dismissed. However, Beatrice continued, as a professional courtesy, I am advising you to retain independent counsel immediately, assess your exposure, and make decisions in your own interest, because Mr. Ashford will not be in a position to protect them for you. Naomi looked at the folder. She did not need to see it again. Harrison Ashford was a sinking ship, and Naomi Blackwell had not survived 29 years by going down with ships. But she had also not survived 29 years by running from wreckage empty-handed. Thank you, Naomi said quietly. Beatrice nodded and stood. At the door, she paused. Mrs. Ashford told me what you said in the hospital room, about the babies being complications. She remembers every word. A beat. In my experience, the things we say to people when we believe they are powerless tend to define us most accurately. She left. Naomi sat alone for 6 minutes. Then she opened her portfolio, removed her phone, and made a call. Not to a lawyer. Not yet. To a contact at the financial consulting firm that had been circling Ashford Capital for the past quarter, angling for a forensic audit engagement. It is Naomi Blackwell, she said. I have something you're going to want. Can we meet tonight? She hung up, closed the portfolio, and walked out of the building without looking back. What she carried with her was not guilt or regret. It was information. 7 months embedded inside Ashford Capital Partners as Director of Strategic Development had given her access to files, projections, and internal communications that painted a detailed picture of Harrison's financial operations. She knew which properties were over-leveraged. She knew which investor reports contained projections that diverged materially from the underlying data. She knew where the weight was, and she knew where the cracks were. And she knew exactly what would happen if someone applied pressure to both at the same time. By Thursday, she had retained an attorney. By the following Monday, she had returned the $640,000 in consulting fees through her firm's operating account, structured to minimize attention. By Wednesday, she had provided the forensic audit firm with a curated selection of documents that, while technically public or semi-public in nature, formed a roadmap to every structural weakness in Ashford Capital's portfolio. She did not do this out of loyalty to Vivian. She did not do this out of remorse. She did this because Naomi Blackwell understood leverage better than anyone in the room, and the greatest leverage available to her at this moment was not silence or flight. It was strategic demolition. If Harrison Ashford was going to fall, Naomi intended to choose the direction. The audit would begin within 6 weeks. Its findings would accelerate a collapse that was already in motion, and Naomi would be clean, rebranded, repositioned, and 3 states away before anyone thought to ask who had opened the door. Chapter 5. 7 weeks after the conference room, the settlement was finalized. Harrison paid the $19.32 million. He sold the art collection first, 14 pieces, recouping 60%. Then a minority stake in a South Side development project, at a loss his accountants called significant and his remaining investors called alarming. Then he refinanced the Lincoln Park property, pulling equity from the building he had once called the crown jewel of his portfolio. Each transaction diminished him in ways that extended beyond finance. In Harrison's world, wealth was identity a gravitational field that determined who returned your calls and who sat beside you at dinner. As his net worth contracted, so did his orbit. Calls less frequent. Dinner invitations with longer gaps. Eye contact at industry events, shifting from direct to peripheral to absent. Then the audit hit. The forensic review of Ashford Capital Partners, triggered by institutional investors whose confidence had been eroding since the divorce became public, uncovered what Naomi had already mapped. Over-leveraged properties, investor reports with projections that diverged from underlying data, a pattern of financial management that prioritized appearance over structural soundness. Harrison did not know where the auditors had gotten their roadmap. He would not find out. Naomi's name appeared nowhere in the proceedings. She had provided public and semi-public documents only, technically available to anyone who knew where to look. She had simply ensured that someone looked. 3 months after the audit began, Harrison Ashford was removed as CEO of Ashford Capital Partners by unanimous board vote. The company entered voluntary restructuring. 2 properties were placed in receivership. The SEC opened a preliminary inquiry. On a Tuesday morning in July, 8 months after the twins were born, Vivian stood in the kitchen of a house in Oak Park, Illinois, watching the sunrise fill the room with warm, golden light. The house was 3 bedrooms, a sunroom facing east, a backyard with a maple tree older than anyone on the street, and a basement. It had taken 4 months to build. Climate-controlled storage, biosafety-rated ventilation, dedicated power circuits, equipment selected piece by piece from catalogs she had studied during late-night feedings. A world-class research facility. The most beautiful room she had ever stood in because it was hers. Not borrowed. Not tolerated. Not mocked. Hers. The Meridian Protocol was in Phase 2 clinical trials at 3 hospitals across 2 continents. She kept a folder on her desk, a plain manila folder filled with letters from mothers in Atlanta and Lagos and London. Letters that said things like, "My daughter slept through the night for the first time in 3 years." Letters that said, "The doctor told us his blood counts are normal." Normal. I did not know that word could make a person cry. She read everyone, answered everyone. 4 months ago, she had established the Elijah Carter Foundation with a portion of the settlement funds. It funded sickle cell research at 12 universities across 4 countries. It provided financial assistance to families navigating the cost of treatment. It funded full-ride scholarships for students from underrepresented communities pursuing degrees in biomedical science. The first cohort of 8 students had begun their programs in the fall. 3 of them had family members with sickle cell disease. One of them had the disease herself. She had named the foundation after Elijah because there was no other name it could carry. Not as a memorial, as a completion. The closing of a circle that had begun on a rooftop in Youngstown when a 12-year-old boy asked his sister whether people could tell when someone was going to be important, and she had told him no. She had been wrong. Elijah had known. He had always known. Gloria was already in the kitchen, scrambling eggs with one hand and holding Caleb on her hip with the other. She had moved from Youngstown 3 months ago, arriving on the 15th with 2 suitcases and a set of non-negotiable opinions about infant nutrition. "You look tired," Gloria said without turning around. "I was up late, reading." Gloria glanced over her shoulder with an expression that required no translation. Caleb was 8 months old, enormous, perpetually hungry, grinning at everything. The ceiling fan, his own feet, the neighbor's cat, his sister, at whom he directed a constant stream of babbling that Lily received with the patient tolerance of a person who had been listening to the same monologue for 8 months and saw no reason to encourage it. Lily was quieter. She watched everything with a concentration that was unusual for her age. Dark, searching eyes cataloging the world in silence. When she vocalized, it was with purpose, a specific cry for hunger. A different one for discomfort, a small, determined grunt when reaching for something beyond her grasp. Vivian picked up the envelope on the counter. NIH letterhead. The Elijah Carter Foundation had been approved for federal matching grants that would triple its annual research funding. She set the letter down and poured her coffee. On the counter, her phone screen lit up with a news notification. She glanced at it. Chicago Tribune. Breaking. Ashford Capital Partners founder Harrison Ashford banned from serving as officer or director of any publicly traded company following SEC consent decree. Federal investigators confirm ongoing inquiry into potential securities violations. Sources close to the investigation indicate additional charges may follow. Vivian read it once. Then she picked up her coffee, swiped the notification away, and set the phone face down on the counter. Gloria had seen it too. She said nothing. She did not need to. 20 years of nursing had taught her that some wounds heal, and some wounds scar, and some wounds are self-inflicted by people who spent their whole lives holding the knife and never once considered that it could cut them too. Eli would have loved them, Gloria said quietly, looking at the twins. He would have been the worst uncle. Terrible jokes. Candy for dinner. The best kind. They were quiet. The kitchen filled with Caleb banging his spoon against his tray and Lily making a small, thoughtful sound. He would have made fun of me for naming the foundation after him, Vivian said. Absolutely. And then told every person he met. Gloria smiled. Small, private, the kind of smile that exists only between people who have lost the same person and found a way to carry that loss without being pulled under. Vivian set down her coffee and lifted Lily from Gloria's lap. The baby looked up at her with dark, steady eyes. Then she reached for Caleb, who came willingly, transferring himself from high chair to mother with cheerful, uncoordinated trust. Egg smeared across his cheek. Grinning, she held them both. From the counter, the phone buzzed again. Another notification. Another headline with the name Ashford in it. She did not look. You are loved, she said softly, her mouth against the tops of their heads. You are safe, and you will never, ever have to make yourself smaller for anyone. The sun came through the kitchen windows and made everything gold. And downstairs, in a laboratory built by a woman the world had underestimated, the work waited. Patient, quiet, important beyond measure. It would always wait, and she would always go back to it, because that was who Vivian Carter had been before she was Vivian Ashford, and it was who she would be long after the name Ashford meant nothing at all. Some people are loud about their power. They announce it, perform it, pin it to their chest like a medal they awarded themselves. And some people are quiet. They build it in basements and in silence and in grief. They carry in the steady rhythm of work done not for applause, but for the person who will never clap because he died at 19 in a hospital bed in Youngstown, but who looked at his sister with ancient, knowing eyes and said, "You're going to fix this." She fixed it. Not for him. That was the one thing she could never do. For someone. For everyone. If you have made it this far, you already know that real power does not announce itself. It works in silence until the silence is no longer necessary. This channel tells stories about people the world underestimated and what happened when it realized it was wrong. Subscribe, turn on the bell, and tell me in the comments, where are you watching from, and what would you have done in Vivian's place? We will see you in the next one.